Welcome to Revenge and Justice, where betrayal finally meets its reckoning. We share powerful first-person stories of men who were underestimated, betrayed, and pushed too far by family business partners and the people they trusted most. If you believe respect must be earned and betrayal always has a price, you've found your home. And now, today's story.
She texted me that morning. "Don't be late, Dad. I already told everyone about the watch." I'd read it twice in the truck sitting in the parking lot, with the engine off, feeling something warm settle in my chest for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. I hadn't felt that warm about anything since Rosemary passed. 300 people were sitting in that auditorium when I opened the box on stage, and it was empty. 4 generations that watch had survived Rosemary's grandfather, carried it through a war, and 30 years later I promised my daughter she'd hold it next the day she walked across a stage in a cap and gown. I always keep my promises. That's not a boast, it's just the only thing I know how to be good at besides fixing locks. The MC stood there with the microphone half raised, waiting for the little speech I'd rehearsed twice on the drive over. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Schmidt." I wasn't ready. I don't think I'd ever be ready for what that empty velvet lining meant. That watch belonged to Rosemary's grandfather, a man named Otto, who carried it through the Ardennes and back, and who used to say a good watch and a good lock had the same job. They both told you exactly what you could trust and exactly when. Rosemary kept it wrapped in the same square of blue velvet her whole life. She used to say it would go to Winter the day Winter earned something that mattered on her own. This was supposed to be that day. I looked out at the folding chairs, at the parents fanning themselves with programs, and then I looked at Winter in the front row. 2 of her friends sat beside her. Armani, who I'd known since she was 12 and used to skin her knees in my driveway, and Elena, quieter, always watching things a beat longer than everyone else. Both of them were already smiling like they knew what was in that box. Winter must have told them too. 24 years old, cap crooked the way it had been crooked since she was 5 and couldn't keep a hair clip straight. She was smiling at me the way she used to smile when she was small enough to sit on my shoulders at the county fair. I used to think I knew everything that smile meant. I didn't say anything for what felt like a very long time. Somewhere behind me, a folding chair creaked. Somewhere in front of me, a phone camera lifted to record whatever I was about to do next. I closed the box. "Sorry, folks," I said, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect. "Wrong box. I'll find the right one." A small laugh moved through the crowd, relieved, easy, the kind of laugh that comes when nothing bad has happened yet. Winter's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. She knew. She had to know. I stepped off that stage, and I didn't look back at her, not once. I want you to understand that took everything I had, because for 24 years, looking back at her was the only thing I ever did right. I sat in a folding chair near the exit for the rest of the ceremony. I don't remember a single name they called. I remember the weight of that empty box on my knee. And I remember thinking that a man who has spent 30 years installing locks on other people's doors should have known better than to trust the one in his own house. Let me take you back because you need to understand what got us here, and it isn't what you think. 5 days earlier, I run a small locksmith and security business out of Peoria, Illinois. 31 years in the trade, safes, deadbolts, keypad systems, the works. Most men my age are thinking about retirement. I think about it too some nights, usually right after I've finished replacing a cylinder lock for some family 2 towns over who just went through a divorce and wanted a fresh start behind a door nobody else had a key to. There's something honest about that work. You give people a place where they get to decide who comes in. Last month, I rekeyed an entire house for a widow out on Farmington Road who didn't trust her late husband's business partner anymore. She cried in her kitchen while I worked, and I didn't ask why. That's the other half of the job nobody tells you about. You learn people's worst moments by the locks they suddenly need changed. My own house is a modest 3-bedroom on the north side, the kind of place I bought 30 years ago thinking I'd fill it with more than just the 3 of us. It's just me now.
Rosemary's been gone 4 years. A stroke, sudden, no warning, the kind of thing that doesn't give you time to say anything you meant to say. Winter was away at school when it happened. She was 20 back then. I don't blame her for not being there. I want that on the record, before anything else, because I know how this sounds. That Thursday, I got home a little after 6, same as every Thursday. Grabbed my keys, checked the mail, walked the perimeter of the house out of habit, 31 years of habit, checking the same latches I could probably check with my eyes closed. Everything was where it belonged. Everything was quiet. I had no idea, walking through that front door, that 4 generations of my wife's family were about to disappear out from under me by the hand of the one person I never thought to lock anything away from. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, same as always. I had no reason yet to think this Thursday would be any different from the 1,000 Thursdays before it. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door and stood in the kitchen for a minute the way I always do, letting the quiet settle. Rosemary used to tease me about it. "You're not clocking out of the world, Franklin, you're just home." But the habit stuck long after she stopped being there to tease me about it. I poured a glass of water I didn't drink and looked at the calendar on the fridge, at the red circle around the date 5 days out. Graduation. I'd already picked up the dry cleaning for my good shirt. Then I did what I do every night, rain or shine, tired or not. I walked the house. It's not superstition. 31 years in this trade will do that to a man. You start to see every door and window as a promise somebody made and might not keep. I checked the deadbolt on the front door first, then the chain, then the window latches. In the living room, the kitchen door that leads out to the garage, the basement door at the bottom of the stairs. Every one of them exactly where it should be. I could do this route with my eyes closed, and some nights I nearly do hand finding the latch before my mind's even caught up to where I am. Rosemary used to walk it with me sometimes, in the early years, back when winter was small enough that we'd find her asleep in strange places, under the kitchen table, halfway up the stairs, with a book still open on her chest. Rosemary would carry her up while I finished the circuit, and by the time I reached the top of the stairs, the house would already be quiet again, both of them tucked away, safe. I don't know when exactly I started doing the walk alone. Abroad, some habits just outlive the reason you started them. The last stop was always upstairs. My bedroom, the closet, the safe bolted into the floor joists. The same week I moved in, 30 years ago, good enough to survive a house fire rated for it. The kind of unit I install for clients who ask for the best and don't blink at the price. Inside it, wrapped in blue velvet, Otto's watch, Rosemary's grandmother's wedding band, a handful of papers that mattered. I didn't open it every night. I just liked knowing it was shut. That Thursday, the closet door was already open a few inches. I told myself I'd left it that way that morning, rushing to get to a job on the east side. I told myself a lot of things in the 4 or 5 seconds it took me to cross that bedroom floor. Then I saw the safe door itself sitting open, barely an inch, the little steel tongue of the latch not quite seated in its catch. Not forced, not pried. No scratch marks around the dial, no scoring on the frame. I'd know. I'm the one who'd know better than anyone alive. Somebody had opened it with the code. I crouched down and pulled the door the rest of the way open, and for a second I just knelt there looking at the empty space where the velvet box should have been. Papers still there. The wedding band still in its little cloth pouch, untouched. Just the watch gone, box and all, like it had never existed. On the closet floor, half under the hanging clothes, I found a single stud earring, small silver, shaped like a crescent moon. Rosemary gave Winter a pair of those for her 16th birthday, the year before the diagnosis. I remember because I was standing right behind Rosemary in the store holding the bag while she picked them out, telling her we should just get the necklace instead, and she said, "No, earrings are better earrings. She'll actually wear every day." I turned that little piece of silver over in my palm for a long time. Nobody else in this world knows the code to that safe. I never wrote it down. I never told a soul. I taught it to exactly one other person 20 years ago. In this same bedroom, both of us laughing while she spun the dial back and forth like it was a game, left twice past 12, right once to 8, left again to the number I never changed. Because changing it felt, at the time, like erasing something I wanted to keep. I stood up. My knees cracked the way they do now, some new indignity every year. I told myself there had to be an explanation that didn't mean what I already knew it meant. Maybe she'd come by to borrow something small and forgot to mention it. Maybe there was a version of tonight where I called her and she laughed and said, "Dad, relax. I just needed to grab something of Mom's," and everything folded itself back into place the way ordinary nights do. I don't know why I still let myself believe that walking down the stairs with the earring pressed into my palm hard enough to leave a mark. Maybe because believing it even for the length of a phone call was better than the alternative. I picked up the phone off the kitchen counter. My hand wasn't steady when I found her name in the list of contacts, and I stood there a second longer than I needed to before I pressed call, listening to it ring once, twice, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than either of them. Somewhere behind that heartbeat was a voice telling me exactly what I already knew and didn't want to say out loud. Not even to myself. Not yet. It rang 4 times before she picked up. I could hear noise behind her right away. The hiss of an espresso machine, somebody laughing too loud. The particular clatter of a coffee shop trying to sound busier than it is. "Hey, Dad." Bright, easy, nothing in her voice that sounded like a person who'd been anywhere near my closet in the last 5 days. "Winter." I hadn't planned what to say past her name. 31 years of talking people through their worst days at their own front doors, and I couldn't find the first sentence for my own daughter. "You okay? You sound weird." I was upstairs a little while ago. I kept my voice level the way I would with a client whose house had just been broken into, the tone that says, "We're going to get through this calmly." The safe was open. A pause. Not long, just long enough that I noticed it the way you notice a door that doesn't quite latch the first time. "Okay, and Mom's watch is gone, Winter. Otto's watch, the one I was supposed to give you Saturday." "Dad, I don't know what you want me to say. Maybe you left it open. You're always in and out of that thing." "I don't leave it open. Not once in 30 years. "Well, maybe this is the one time." I heard her shift the phone, heard the barista call another name that wasn't hers. "Are you seriously calling me about this right now? I'm literally about to walk into a study group." "It's important, Winter." "Everything's important with you lately. I can't even get lunch without you finding something to worry about. I found one of your earrings on the closet floor, the little silver ones your mother gave you." Another pause. This one longer. Behind her, the espresso machine hissed again, and somebody called out an order, a caramel something extra shot, completely unaware that on the other end of this call, the ground was opening up under a 65-year-old man standing alone in his kitchen. I probably lost it there weeks ago. I was at the house like 2 Sundays back. Remember, I grabbed the sweater I left in my old room. "You didn't mention the watch." "Because I didn't take the watch, Dad." Her voice sharpened, quick the way it does when she feels cornered. I know that tone. I've heard it since she was 6 years old and I asked who broke the lamp. "God, you always do this. You always think the worst of me first and ask questions never." "I'm not thinking anything. I'm asking you a simple question." "No, you're not. You've already decided. I can hear it. You called me sounding like you're interrogating a suspect, not talking to your own daughter." I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a version of myself from 4 years ago was telling me to apologize, to smooth this over, to say, "You're right, I'm sorry, forget I brought it up." The same version of myself that had said some form of those words 100 times since Rosemary died. Every time Winter's voice hit that particular register of hurt. "I just need to understand what happened to it." "Nothing happened to it. I don't have your stupid watch." A beat. "I have to go. My order's up." "Winter, I'll call you later, okay? Love you." And then the particular flat click of a call ending before I'd said anything back, before I'd even decided whether "love you back" was something I could say right then and mean it the way I wanted to. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone that had gone quiet, the earring still sitting on the counter where I'd set it down before I dialed. I want you to understand something about silence. I've spent my whole career around it. In houses where a couple's just been robbed, in rooms where someone's just found out their business partner cleaned out the safe. Silence has a temperature. This one was cold, in a way I didn't have a name for yet. She hadn't asked what I was going to do about it. She hadn't asked if I was okay. 4 years old, this girl once cried for 3 straight days because she lost a hair clip her mother gave her down a storm drain on Elm Street, and I remember standing at the curb with her at midnight, both of us staring down that grate like we could will it back up. 20 years later, she couldn't manage 30 seconds of concern over her mother's actual wedding heirloom going missing from a fireproof safe. I thought about calling her back. I thought about a lot of things standing in that kitchen, driving over to wherever she was, showing up at her apartment, sitting her down the way I used to when she was small enough to sit still for it. But she was 24 now, not 4. And a man learns, eventually, that showing up uninvited rarely gets him anything but a locked door of his own. I set the phone down on the counter next to the earring and stood there a long time, not moving, not calling anyone else, not doing any of the things a reasonable man in my position probably should have been doing already. I just stood in my own kitchen in the quiet I'd built for myself, one deadbolt at a time, and understood for the first time in 5 days that the quiet wasn't safety. It never had been. It was just the sound of nobody telling me the truth. I wasn't there for most of what I'm about to tell you. I want to say that up front because everything else in this story I lived through with my own 2 eyes. This part I only have secondhand, pieced together over the years from the handful of times Winter ever talked about it, usually late at night, usually after enough silence that the words seemed to surprise her as much as me. I've turned it over so many times in my head that it plays now like something I witnessed myself. Maybe that's its own kind of haunting. 4 years ago, Winter was 23 semesters into a business degree at a college 2 hours south, doing a spring internship at a marketing firm downtown. She was in her dorm room that Tuesday night, packing for an early flight and work conference, her first real one, the kind of thing she'd been excited about for weeks, when her phone lit up with my name on it. I told her Rosemary had gotten worse. Not an emergency yet, the doctor had said, but worse, the kind of worse where a person starts using words like, "we should keep a close eye," instead of words like "stable." I asked her to think about coming home a day early. She told me later she stood in that hallway outside her room for almost 10 minutes after we hung up, phone still warm in her hand, running the math the way 20-year-olds run math when they desperately want an answer that doesn't cost them anything. The conference mattered. Her supervisor was going to be there. She'd told herself all semester that this internship was the thing that was finally going to prove she could build a life that wasn't just an extension of ours. And underneath all of that, she told me, was something simpler and uglier that she was ashamed of even years later. She didn't want to go home and watch her mother get worse. She'd already watched so much of it. Some nights, she'd catch herself hoping in the small, cruel corner of her mind reserved for thoughts you never say out loud, that if she just wasn't there for the bad parts, maybe they wouldn't be as real. She called her roommate, a girl named Priya, and asked what she thought. Priya said what any 20-year-old would say to her friend, that hospitals exaggerate, that moms bounce back, that she shouldn't blow up her whole week over a phone call that didn't even use the word emergency. So she went to bed. She set her alarm for the flight. She told herself she'd call first thing in the morning and make a real decision then, with better information, when she wasn't so tired and scared and 300 words into a packing list. The call came at 2:47 in the morning. She told me she knew before she even answered it. Something about the specific silence of a phone ringing at that hour in a dorm hallway where everyone else was asleep made her hands go cold before she'd said a single word. It was me on the other end. I don't remember what I said. I've never asked her what I sounded like saying it. I only know that by the time Winter got a friend to drive her the 2 hours home, her mother had already been gone for almost 6 hours, and there was nothing left to hurry toward except a hospital room somebody else had already finished cleaning. She has never once, in 4 years, said the words out loud to me. Not, "I should have come home." Not, "I could have made it." She has never had to say them because I've watched her build an entire architecture around avoiding the 6 hours between that first phone call and the second one, changing the subject whenever a conversation drifted near it, leaving rooms, picking fights about smaller things rather than sit inside that particular silence for even a minute. I used to think that was just grief working itself out in its own strange shape. I understand now it was something closer to a wound that never got to close, because nobody, including me, ever made her look directly at it. I found out about all of this piece by piece, mostly from Priya at the funeral, who told me gently, the way you tell a grieving man something he doesn't need to hear right then, but will need to know eventually. I didn't say anything to Winter about it that week. I didn't say anything about it for years. I stood in the funeral home 2 days after Rosemary died, in a room that smelled like lilies and carpet cleaner. Signing papers, a stranger kept sliding across a desk toward me. Casket options, programs, a guest book with a pen chained to it like somebody might try to steal it. I signed everything without really reading it. Somewhere down the hall I could hear Winter crying in the bathroom. The kind of crying that doesn't stop when someone knocks, and I remember standing outside that door for a long time with my hand raised, not sure if going in would help her or just give her one more person to perform being okay for.
I didn't say anything. I never said anything. I've had 4 years to think about whether that was kindness or cowardice, and I still don't have an answer I trust. I only know that somewhere in that hallway, 10 minutes of hesitation became the 6 hours that shaped everything that came after, and neither of us ever found the words to say so out loud.
I want to tell you about the 4 years between the funeral and that Thursday, because I think you need to see them the way I lived them before you can understand the way Winter saw them. I didn't think of myself as anything but a father trying to hold on to the only family he had left. I want that understood even now, even knowing everything I know. The first year, it was her phone. Rosemary used to be the one who kept track of things like that, parent-teacher nights, curfews, the particular radar mothers have for when something's wrong before their kid says a word. I never had that radar on my own, so I built a clumsy version of it. I followed Winter's social media under an account with no picture, a name that wasn't quite mine. Wendell87, I called it, after nobody, just a name that wouldn't mean anything to anybody who went looking. I told myself it was just so I'd know she was safe. If she posted a photo from a party at 11 at night, I'd lie awake until I saw her post something the next morning, a coffee, a class notebook, anything that told me she'd made it home. Some nights I'd catch myself refreshing the app, the way I used to check the locks, room by room, latch by latch, except there was no latch here, just a small, glowing rectangle that told me nothing for certain, and everything I wanted to imagine. She never knew that account was me. I like to think that made it harmless, a man checking a window, not a man standing in the room.
The second year, it was showing up.
Not often, I want to be fair to myself here, but enough. She mentioned once in passing some diner near her apartment where she liked to get lunch on Saturdays with Armani and Alina. A place called The Skillet, with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot too small for its own good. Twice that spring I found a reason to be in that part of town on a Saturday, picking up a part for a job that could have waited until Monday. Checking on a rental property I don't actually own, driving a slow loop past a building I had no business near. I'd walk past the window of that diner like I was just passing through, and if I saw her in there, laughing, safe, surrounded by people who loved her, I'd feel something in my chest loosen that had been tight since the day of the funeral, and I'd go on with my day like nothing had happened. If she caught my eye through the glass, I had a whole speech ready. Oh, what a coincidence. I was just in the neighborhood, and she always nodded and let it go, the way you let go of something you've decided isn't worth the fight yet. The third time, she didn't let it go. It was a Tuesday in late winter, almost a year to the day before the graduation. I'd driven past that same diner on my way back from a job, or told myself that's what I was doing, and I saw her through the window at a corner table, alone this time. No Armani, no Elena. Just her and a boy I didn't recognize sitting across from her, leaning in close, the way people lean in when they're saying something they don't want overheard. He had the kind of easy, practiced smile that made me distrust him before he'd done a single thing to earn it. The smile of a man who's used to being believed. I slowed the truck.
I don't know what I thought I was going to do. Walk in, introduce myself, ask him his intentions, like some relic from a different century. I just wanted to see his face, memorize it in case I ever needed to.
She saw me first. She didn't wave. She didn't smile the easy smile she gave strangers. She looked at me through that window for 3 full seconds, long enough that the boy across from her turned to see what she was looking at, and something in her expression shifted into a place I hadn't seen it go before. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something quieter and more permanent than anger. Recognition, maybe. Like she'd just confirmed something she'd suspected about me for a long time and had been hoping right up until that moment that she was wrong about. I never did learn that boy's name that winter. It would be almost a year before I heard it again, in a very different room, from a very different kind of stranger. I drove home that night, telling myself the way I always did, that a father checking on his daughter wasn't the same thing as a father who couldn't let her go. I told myself love didn't have a limit, and if it didn't have a limit, it couldn't be the wrong shape either. I still believed that mostly the night I found the safe standing open. It would take me a good while longer to understand that Winter had stopped believing it a long time before I did, that somewhere between the phone I followed and the diner window I kept finding myself outside of, she'd quietly stopped seeing a father who loved her and started seeing a man she had to manage the way you manage weather or traffic or anything else you can't argue with but have learned to work around. I want to go back further than the diner, further than any of it, to a version of this house before it ever needed the kind of vigilance I gave it later. Winter was 8. Rosemary was alive and humming in the kitchen most evenings, some old song she never got the words right to and didn't care. That was a good year. I don't say that lightly about any year. Most of them blur together the way years do once you're my age, but that one I remember in specific colors. I'd just installed the safe. I remember being proud of it in the particular way a man is proud of work he's done with his own hands, for his own family, not for a paycheck. Rosemary wanted somewhere to keep her grandmother's letters and the wedding band that had been her mother's before it was hers. I wanted somewhere to keep the things that mattered more than anything else in that house, which back then wasn't documents or jewelry. It was the 3 of us, and everything that made the 3 of us feel permanent. Winter found me installing it on a Saturday afternoon, cross-legged on the closet floor, with a level and a drill and more patience than I usually had for anything. She asked what it was. I told her it was a safe, the kind of box that only opens if you know its secret. She wanted to know the secret immediately, the way 8-year-olds want to know everything immediately, certain that knowing was the same as having. So I taught her. Not because I thought it was wise, Rosemary probably would have said it wasn't if she'd been the one to walk in on it, but because Winter had that particular look she used to get, chin tucked, eyes wide and serious, when something mattered enough to her that she stopped being silly for a minute. I loved that look. I still do, actually, when I let myself think about it, which isn't often anymore. Left twice past 12, I told her, guiding her small hand on the dial. Right once to 8. Left again all the way to 4. She got it wrong the first 6 times, giggling every time the handle wouldn't give more, delighted by the failing than she would have been by getting it right on the first try. She'd stick her tongue out slightly whenever she concentrated, same as her mother did over crossword puzzles, a habit I'd never told either of them they shared. On the 7th try, something clicked, and the door swung open onto nothing but empty shelves waiting for a life that hadn't been lived yet, and she looked up at me like she'd just picked a lock on the whole world. "Can I do it again?" "You can do it every day if you want," I said, and she did for about a week, running to that closet every afternoon after school just to spin the dial and hear that small mechanical click, like it was a magic word she'd learned and needed to keep testing to make sure it still worked. "Will I always remember it?" she asked. "If you remember it today, you'll remember it when you're 80, I told her. That wasn't even true, probably. I don't remember half of what I knew at 8, but I said it anyway, the way parents say things they want to be true. Hard enough that saying them feels like a kind of promise. That's the thing about a good combination, Winnie. Once it's yours, nobody can lock you out of it. You'll never be standing outside your own life, wondering how to get back in. She held on to that phrase for years in the way kids hold on to things adults say without meaning them as heavily as they land. I'd hear her repeat some version of it to friends who came over. My dad says I'll never be locked out of my own life, proud of it, like it was a magic trick only our family knew. I think about that afternoon more than I think about almost anything else from before Rosemary got sick. The drill still out on the closet floor, the smell of sawdust and metal shavings. Rosemary leaning in the doorway at some point, dish towel still over one shoulder, watching us with her arms crossed and a look on her face I understood then as amusement and understand now, looking back, as something closer to relief. Relief that whatever happened to either of us, this particular door would always open for the other one. She'd said something that day I only half registered at the time, something like, "Don't teach her too many of your secrets, Franklin, or she'll never need either of us." I laughed it off. I wish now I'd asked her what she meant by it. Because 4 years after she was gone, I finally understood. I thought about that phrase again, standing in that same closet 16 years later with an empty velvet box in my hands and one of her earrings pressed into my palm. Once it's yours, nobody can lock you out of it. I'd meant it as a gift, a small piece of magic to hand a little girl who trusted me completely. It had become, without my noticing exactly when, the exact set of numbers that let my own daughter walk into my house and take the one thing in it I couldn't replace. The lock had done precisely what I built it to do. It had simply stopped protecting the person I built it for and started protecting her instead, from consequences from me, from whatever it was she'd needed protecting from, long before that watch ever went missing. 2 weeks before I found that safe standing open, Winter came to dinner on a Sunday, the way she did most weeks since the funeral. An unspoken arrangement neither of us had ever put into words, just something we both kept showing up for. I made pot roast. It's one of maybe 4 things I know how to cook well, and it was Rosemary's recipe, written in her looping handwriting on an index card I keep in the drawer beside the stove, even though I've had it memorized for years. Winter always ate it like it meant something, even on nights when everything else between us felt strained. She'd talk about work, about a professor she liked, about nothing much at all, and for an hour or so most Sundays it was almost possible to believe we were doing fine. She brought it up over dessert, the way she brought up most things she suspected I'd say no to, casual at first, testing the water before committing to the ask. "So a few of us are doing a trip in June, before everyone scatters for real jobs and stuff." She said it looking at her plate, not at me. "Armani, Elena, and my boyfriend." I felt something small and cold move through me at that word boyfriend, though I couldn't have told you why in the moment. Maybe some part of me already knew. I didn't ask his name. I told myself later that was an oversight. I'm not sure anymore that it was. "That sounds nice," I said, and meant it mostly. "It's $2,500 for the whole thing, flights, the house, we're splitting everything." She said the number fast, the way you say a number you've already decided is reasonable and are hoping I'll agree fast enough that neither of us has to sit with it. I know it's a lot. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't kind of stretched right now. I did the math in my head the way I always did before I said no to anything, which wasn't often the mortgage, the slow season I'd had that spring, the retirement account I'd been meaning to look at and kept putting off because I didn't like what I already suspected I'd find. $2,500 wasn't a number that would break me. That wasn't really the reason I hesitated. It was something quieter than money. Something about the particular exhaustion of always being the answer to every gap in her life 4 years running, without ever once being asked whether I had anything left to give. "I can't swing that right now, sweetheart," I said. "Not this time." The silence that followed had a shape to it I recognized from 100 small disagreements over the years. The kind where I could already feel the conversation deciding to go somewhere neither of us wanted it to go, and neither of us knowing how to stop it once it started rolling. "Are you serious?" "I am. I wish I wasn't." "You always find a way when it's something you care about. You just don't care about this." "That's not fair, Winter." "Isn't it though? You spent, what, $3,000 redoing the porch last year? For a porch nobody even sits on." "That porch was falling apart. It was a safety issue." "Everything's a safety issue with you. That's kind of the problem."
She pushed her plate away, the fork clattering against the rim. "You'll spend money on things, Dad, just never on me, not when it actually matters."
That's not true, and you know it isn't.
Do I? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels pretty true.
I didn't have a good answer to that. Not one I could say out loud without it sounding like an accusation about how she spent the money I'd already given her freely for 4 years, without ever once asking what it went toward. So I said nothing. And the nothing sat there between us, on the table next to the pot roast neither of us was eating anymore.
You know what? Forget it. She stood up so fast, her chair scraped hard against the floor. I don't know why I even bother asking you for anything anymore. You always find a reason.
Winter, sit down. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You said no. I heard you. She was already at the door, jacket half on one shoulder, the particular controlled fury of someone who wants you to know they're furious without giving you the satisfaction of a scene. You're so controlling, you know that. You have been since Mom died. You just don't see it because you dress it up as caring. The door didn't slam. That was almost worse than if it had. It clicked shut, quiet and final. The same kind of quiet I'd spent 31 years installing into other people's doors. And I sat alone at that table with 2 full plates going cold and a fear I didn't say out loud to anyone, not even myself. Not really the fear that one of these Sundays, that door was going to close behind her and I wasn't going to get another one. I sat there a long time after her car pulled out of the driveway, listening to the particular silence a house makes when it's just remembered it's too big for one person. I scraped both plates into the trash without eating either. I put the index card back in its drawer beside the stove, careful with it the way I'm careful with most things that used to belong to Rosemary. And I told myself I'd done the right thing, the responsible thing. The thing a father is supposed to do when his grown daughter asks for money he genuinely couldn't spare without some sacrifice. I believed that, mostly. I still believe it, if I'm honest. What I didn't understand yet, sitting at that table, was what saying no for the first time in 4 years was about to cost either of us. I wasn't in that apartment. I want to say that clearly the same way I said it about the night Rosemary died. Because everything I'm about to tell you came to me much later in pieces, mostly from Winter herself, during a stretch of time when she finally started talking to me in whole sentences instead of clipped, careful ones. Some of it came from a detective's report I read more times than was probably good for me. I've put it together as best I can. I believe it's close to true because it explains everything that happened after in a way nothing else does. And because the version of the story where she acted entirely alone never quite fit the daughter I raised, however angry I've been at her since. She showed up at his place that Sunday night, still furious, still replaying the argument at my kitchen table on some kind of loop. The particular righteous anger of a person who needs someone else to confirm they weren't in the wrong. He was good at that. I understand that about him now, in a way I didn't have any way of understanding then. Back when he was still just an unnamed shape sitting across a diner table from my daughter, a smile I'd clocked and distrusted through a window and never gotten close enough to put a name to. He let her talk for a long time before he said much of anything, which she told me once was one of the things she liked about him, how he listened, or seemed to, better than almost anyone else in her life, certainly better than her father, who was always fixing things instead of just sitting still with her in whatever she was feeling. When she got to the part about the money, about me saying no, about "you're so controlling," he didn't defend me, and he didn't exactly agree with her either. He did something more effective than both. "You know you don't owe him anything, right?" he said. "Not the way you think you do." She told me she didn't fully understand what he meant at first, and he explained it the way he explained most things to her. Gently, patiently, like he was the only person who'd ever bothered to actually think it through. Her mother was gone. That wasn't her fault. Whatever guilt she carried about the 6 hours, the phone call, the conference she almost hadn't skipped, her father's rules, his money, his approval, none of that was a debt she'd agreed to. She'd just absorbed it, the way kids absorb things without ever choosing it for herself. "You're allowed to just live your life," he told her. "You're allowed to want things without asking permission for them."
It's a good line. I'll give him that. It has just enough truth in it to feel like wisdom instead of what it actually was, which was a hook baited with exactly the thing she needed to hear most. I think about how easily I might have believed something like that myself at 24, grieving, tired of being managed by someone who loved me too carefully to ever let me make my own mistakes. She mentioned the watch almost as an aside, she told me later. Just talking the way you talk when someone's finally listening, how it was sitting in that safe doing nothing, how her dad was going to make some big ceremony out of handing it over at graduation, like it was some kind of prize she had to earn, how it felt less like a gift and more like one more thing tethering her to a version of her life she hadn't chosen. I don't know exactly which one of them said it first. She's never been fully honest with me about that part, and I've stopped pushing for an answer I'm not sure would change anything now. What I do know is that somewhere in that conversation, the idea stopped being a complaint and started being a plan. He knew a guy, or knew of one, an antiques dealer a few towns over who paid fair prices, no questions asked if the paperwork looked right. It wasn't stealing, he told her. It was hers, wasn't it? Family sentimental, sure, but hers. Nobody could steal something that already belonged to you. She told me she sat with that for a long time that night, turning it over, wanting badly to believe it was as simple as he made it sound. Some small, honest part of her, she admitted this to me only once, months later, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, knew it wasn't hers yet. Not really. Not until I'd actually put it in her hands the way I'd promised to. But she wanted so badly for someone to tell her that taking it wasn't a betrayal, that it was closer to a kind of freedom, and he was right there, offering her exactly that story, wrapped up neat enough that she didn't have to look too closely at the seams. She didn't say yes that night. She told me that much, and I believe her. She just didn't say no either, and by the time she left his apartment sometime after midnight, the version of the plan that would empty my safe 5 days later had already started taking a shape neither of them would bother naming out loud for a while yet. Not a plan exactly, not something either of them could have written down and called a decision, just a door that had been left open a crack, the way doors get left open, waiting for someone to walk through, without ever quite deciding to. I didn't call anyone else that night. I didn't call the police. Not yet. That thought hadn't even fully formed. I just stood in my kitchen for a long while after Winter hung up on me, holding that little silver earring. And then I got my keys off the hook and got in the truck. Because 31 years in this business have taught me that when something in a house doesn't make sense, you don't sit around theorizing, you go look. I drove without the radio on, the way I do most nights when something's sitting heavy on me. I've spent 3 decades installing security in half the businesses on the industrial side of this city. Safes, cameras, alarm systems, wired into back rooms most customers never see, and that kind of work teaches you the map of a place in a way regular driving never does. I knew which pawn shops in this town ran clean and which ones didn't ask enough questions. I knew more specifically that a watch like Otto's wouldn't go to some strip mall cash for gold place. Whoever sold it would have wanted a buyer who'd recognize what they had. That meant an estate dealer somewhere that handled real antiques, not just chains and class rings. There are only a handful of those left in Peoria. I started running the list in my head, and somewhere around the second name I let myself think for the first time all night about the promise itself, not the fact of the watch missing, but the actual moment I'd made it. It was maybe 8 months before Rosemary died, back when she still had good days mixed in with the bad ones, the kind where she'd sit up in bed and want to talk instead of sleep. The chemo had taken most of her hair by then, and she'd taken to wearing this soft blue scarf Winter had bought her, tied loose at the back of her neck, the way she used to wear scarves before any of this started, like she was still just going out for the afternoon, instead of fighting for her life, one bad week at a time. She'd asked me to bring her the velvet box one afternoon, and I did, and she held it in both hands the way you'd hold something alive, turning it over, tracing the engraving on the case with her thumb, even though her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. When Winter's ready, she told me, not before. She needs to earn it, not just inherit it. Otto always said a thing you're given for nothing you don't know how to keep. She'd looked up at me then, tired but certain in the particular way she got about things that mattered to her. A certainty that had nothing to do with how weak the rest of her had become. "Promise me you'll wait for the right moment. Don't just hand it over because it's easier."
I promised her. I would have promised her anything in that room in those months, but that one I meant with my whole chest, the way you mean something you already suspect is going to be hard to keep. I'd pictured the right moment 100 times over the years that followed, imagined Winter's face when I finally handed it to her, imagined telling her what her mother had said, imagined it landing the way Rosemary had wanted it to land, like something earned instead of something owed. Instead, I'd pictured a graduation stage, 300 strangers watching, and somewhere underneath all that ceremony, I still felt her watching me get that part wrong. I turned onto the stretch of road where most of the town's older dealers had set up shop decades ago, back when this part of the city still had foot traffic worth having. Half the storefronts were empty now, the other half hanging on with faded awnings and hand-lettered signs, the kind of businesses that survive on regulars and reputations instead of walk-ins. I checked 2 names off my mental list within the first 10 minutes. A jeweler I knew for a fact only bought in gold weight, not pieces, with history, and a pawn shop I'd installed a camera system for 2 years back that dealt almost exclusively in guns and tools. I remembered installing that system, actually remembered the owner complaining about a break-in the year before, and I remembered thinking at the time that a good lock only ever bought you time, never certainty, a thought that felt considerably less abstract now than it had then. The third name on my list sat at the far end of the block, past a shuttered laundromat and a diner that had closed sometime last year, its windows still papered over with old menus nobody had bothered to take down. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, gold letters on dark green, the paint slightly chipped at the corners, the way things get when a business has been standing in the same spot longer than most of its neighbors.
Blanchard Antiques and Estate. I sat in the truck for a moment before I got out, engine ticking as it cooled, streetlight buzzing faintly overhead, and I thought about Rosemary's hands on that velvet box, about the promise I'd made her in a room that smelled like hospital soap and the lavender lotion she liked, and about how close I might be in the next 5 minutes to finding out exactly how badly I'd already broken it. A bell over the door announced me the moment I stepped inside, an old brass thing that sounded like it had been doing that job since before I was born. The shop smelled like cedar and old paper dust settled deep into the grain of furniture that had outlived whoever first owned it. Glass cases ran along both walls, watches and rings and brooches arranged under soft yellow light. The kind of lighting that makes everything look a little more valuable than it probably is. A grandfather clock in the corner kept a slow, deliberate tick that seemed to slow down the whole room around it. And for a moment standing there, I understood why a man might spend his whole life surrounded by things other people had already finished needing. A man came out from a back room, wiping his hands on a cloth, 60s maybe, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, the unhurried movements of someone who's never once in his life felt the need to rush a customer. "Evening. Help you find something?" "I'm not shopping," I said. "I'm looking for something specific, a pocket watch, gold case engraved on the back initials OV, a small compass rose underneath. It would have come in sometime in the last week." Something shifted in his expression, subtle, the particular carefulness of a man who's had this exact conversation before and knows it rarely ends well for somebody. "And you are?" "Franklin Schmidt. That watch belongs to my late wife's family. It went missing out of a safe in my home 5 days ago." He didn't answer right away. He set the cloth down on the counter and studied me for a moment the way you'd study a stranger claiming something serious, weighing whether I looked like a man telling the truth or a man about to cause trouble in his shop. Whatever he decided, it must have landed in my favor because he nodded once and said, "Give me a minute," and disappeared into the back room. He came back holding it. I don't know how to describe what it does to a man seeing something that specific after 5 days of not knowing where it was. My hands actually went a little unsteady reaching for it, and he let me hold it careful the way you hand someone something you already understand matters more than its price tag suggests. "Elliot Blanchard," he said, watching my face while I turned the watch over. "Found the initials the compass rose exactly where they'd always been. I bought this Thursday afternoon, paid $400 for it, which, I'll be honest with you, was fair market for what I was told about its provenance. If I'd known there was a family dispute attached to it, I'd have handled things differently. Who sold it to you? He went quiet again, and I watched him make a calculation I recognized from my own line of work. How much you owe a stranger in your shop versus how much you owe the paperwork you're legally required to keep. I need to see some identification from you first, and I'll need to know exactly what you're planning to do with this information, Mr. Schmidt, because I run a legitimate business and I don't intend to become part of a family fight I've got no stake in. I gave him my license. I told him as calmly as I could manage that I didn't know yet what I was planning to do, only that I needed to understand what had happened before I decided anything. That seemed to satisfy him enough. He pulled a folder from beneath the counter, thumbed through a few pages, and turned one around to face me. A photocopy of a driver's license, Winter's face looking back up at me. Her actual name, her actual address. No attempt at deception on that front at least, which somehow made it worse instead of better. Beneath it, a signed statement, her handwriting, claiming the watch had been a gift from her grandmother. Hers free and clear to sell. She signed an affidavit of ownership, Elliot said. Standard procedure. If it turns out that wasn't accurate, that's a legal problem for her, not for me. I acted in good faith on the paperwork I was given. I stared at her signature for a long time. I've seen that signature on birthday cards, permission slips, the guest book at her mother's funeral. I'd never once imagined seeing it attached to a lie. Was she alone? I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer, had suspected it since a diner window a year ago, since a word boyfriend that had gone cold in my chest at Sunday dinner. Elliot glanced back down at his folder, at something on the second page I couldn't see from where I stood. No, he said. She wasn't. Who was with her? He turned the folder another few degrees, tapped a line near the bottom with one finger, a name, written in a different hand than Winter's, listed as a witness to the transaction. The kind of formality a careful dealer builds into every sale to cover himself. She didn't come alone, sir. I stood there in that quiet shop. Dust drifting slow through the yellow light, and for a moment neither of us said anything else at all. Grandfather clock in the corner kept ticking indifferent, the same steady rhythm it must have kept through 100 other conversations in this room that mattered just as much to somebody as this one mattered to me. I set the watch down on the glass counter carefully, the way you set down something you're not ready to trust your own hands with a moment longer. And I looked at that name written in a stranger's handwriting until the letters stopped meaning anything at all. I can't just hand it back to you, Elliot said after I'd set the watch down and neither of us had moved for a while. I want to be straight with you about that because I understand what you're feeling right now, and I understand it probably doesn't include a lot of patience for paperwork.
I don't care about the paperwork. I care about getting it home.
I know, but Illinois law doesn't really give either of us a shortcut here. He said it gently, the way a man says something he's had to explain before to people who didn't want to hear it. Once a piece comes into my shop with a signed affidavit of ownership and somebody with a legitimate competing claim shows up disputing that ownership, I'm required to notify law enforcement. Not optional. If I just hand it over to whoever asks loudest, I'm the one exposed, receiving stolen property.
Obstruction? Take your pick. I've been in this business 26 years. I didn't get to 26 years by making exceptions for people I feel sorry for, even when I do feel sorry for them.
You feel sorry for me. I've got 2 daughters of my own, Mr. Schmidt. I can imagine standing where you're standing right now, and I don't envy it. He said it plainly, no performance in it, and somehow that was harder to hear than sympathy would have been. Doesn't change what the law requires of me. I wish it did. So what happens now? I call it in. An officer comes out, takes statements, looks at what documentation exists on both sides. Your ownership, her affidavit, the police can sort out which one. Holds up in the meantime, the watch goes into evidence, not back onto my shelf and not into your pocket. That's how this has to go if we're doing it the right way. I stood there, turning that over. Some part of me, the part that had spent 31 years solving problems quietly with tools instead of paperwork, fixing things before they became anybody's official business, wanted to ask him if there was another way. A cash offer, maybe. buy it back at whatever he'd paid plus something fair for his trouble, walk out with it in my pocket tonight and let the rest of it stay a private matter between me and my daughter, the way everything else between us had always eventually gotten resolved. It would have been so easy. I had the money, I could have been home within the hour, watch in hand, and Winter would never even have to know I'd found out. But even as the thought formed, I understood something underneath it that I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. If I bought my way out of this quietly, the way I'd bought my way out of every hard conversation with Winter for 4 straight years, nothing about any of it would actually change. She'd learn one more time that there was no floor under her, that whatever she did, her father would find a way to make the consequence disappear before she ever had to feel the weight of it. I'd been doing that her whole life without calling it what it was. I was tired standing in that shop under that yellow light of not calling things what they were.
"Call it in,"
I said. Elliot studied me for a second, the same careful weighing look he'd given me when I first walked through the door, like he wanted to be sure I understood what I was actually asking for. "You're sure?" "No," I said honestly. "But do it anyway." He nodded, reached under the counter for a phone, and made the call in a low, businesslike voice, giving an address, a case description, the kind of language you only pick up from having made this particular call more than once before. I stood by the window while he talked, looking out at the darkened street, at the shuttered laundromat, and the diner with its papered-over windows. And I thought about Winter, somewhere out there tonight, unaware, laughing, probably. No idea yet that the ground under her had just started to shift. It took 11 minutes for the patrol car to arrive. I know, because I watched the clock on the wall the entire time. The same slow grandfather clock ticking off each one like it had all the time in the world. Which I suppose it did. It was the only thing in that shop, including me, that wasn't in any particular hurry to know how tonight was going to end. Elliot busied himself behind the counter, filling out a form of some kind, not unkind about it, just giving me the particular privacy people offer a man they can tell is somewhere else in his own head. I picked the watch back up once, just to hold it, and set it back down before I could talk myself into slipping it into my pocket and walking straight out the door. Red and blue light swept once across the front window, silent, no siren, and settled into a steady pulse against the glass, throwing color across the display cases in slow rotation. A car door opened and closed outside. I turned to watch a figure cross the sidewalk toward the shop entrance, unhurried.
The particular walk of someone who's done this exact approach 1,000 times and has learned not to rush the last 10 feet of it, the walk of a man who understands that whatever's waiting on the other side of a door running toward it never actually gets you there any faster.
The bell over the door rang again. He introduced himself before he even finished crossing the threshold, badge already out the practiced motion of a man who'd learned that showing it early puts people at ease faster than making them ask. "Detective Trent Reese, you must be Mr. Schmidt. 50s maybe, gray at the temples, the kind of tired around the eyes that comes less from any single case and more from 20 years of cases exactly like it. The specific fatigue of a man who's watched too many families arrive at exactly this moment, and never quite the same way twice." Elliot walked him through the paperwork first. The affidavit, the photocopied license, the watch itself sitting on the counter under that yellow light like it had no idea it was the center of anything. Trent listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, jotting things in a small notebook with a pen that looked older than most of his career. When Elliot finished, Trent turned to me and something in his posture shifted. The professional courtesy of the last few minutes settling into something more direct. "Walk me through your side, Mr. Schmidt. From the beginning, if you don't mind. Sometimes the order things happened in matters more than people expect." So I did. The safe standing open, the earring on the closet floor, the phone call, her voice sharpening the way it does when she feels cornered. I told him about Winter's age, about her mother, about the 4 years since leaving, in more than I meant to and less than I probably should have. The way you do when a stranger is quietly deciding how much of your family to believe. He let me finish before he said anything. Then he set his pen down, folded his hands on the counter.
and looked at me the way you look at someone you're about to ask a question you already suspect they haven't fully thought through yet. I've got to ask you something, Mr. Schmidt, and I want you to actually sit with it before you answer, because I've had this conversation with a lot of fathers over the years, and most of them answer it faster than they should.
Go ahead.
Based on what's in front of me, the value of the piece, the signed false statement of ownership, this isn't a slap on the wrist if it moves forward. We're talking felony theft, likely fraud charges layered on top because of that affidavit. Not a diversion program, not a stern talking to, a record, possibly time, depending on how a prosecutor wants to play it and how a judge feels that week. He let that sit a moment before continuing. I've seen judges go easy on a first offense from a kid with no priors and a good explanation. I've also seen them go the other way entirely when there's a signed document involved because a signature says premeditation in a way a snatched purse never quite does. I can't promise you which version your daughter gets. Nobody can this early. That's not me trying to scare you into backing off. That's just what the math actually says once I write this up and it leaves my hands. I felt something in my chest go very still, the particular stillness that comes right before you commit to something you can't take back. Once I process this the way it's supposed to be processed, he went on, there's no quiet version anymore. No calling me back tomorrow to say you'd rather handle it as a family matter. It goes where it goes. Are you sure this is what you want? I thought about the 4 years of dinners with 2 plates and one absorbing every cost alone. I thought about a diner window, a boy's smile I'd distrusted on sight, a phrase, "You don't owe him anything," that I hadn't heard yet, but would understand completely once I did. I thought about Rosemary's hands on that velvet box, the promise I'd made her wait for the right moment. Don't just hand it over because it's easier, a promise I'd already broken once tonight by even considering buying my way out quietly, and would break completely if I let this go now, just to spare us both the next several months. I'm sure, I said. And then because it felt important to be honest with him the way he'd been honest with me, no, I'm not sure at all. But I want it processed anyway. Trent studied me for a long moment, the kind of look I imagine he'd given 100 fathers before me, in rooms just like this one, weighing whether what he was looking at was resolve or just a man too proud to say he'd changed his mind 3 minutes too late. Whatever he decided, he nodded once slow and picked his pen back up. There's one more thing you should know before I write this up, he said. The affidavit lists a witness to the transaction, somebody who signed alongside your daughter. I'll be looking into him just as closely as I'll be looking into her, sometimes more closely, depending on what turns up. People don't usually show up at a moment like that by accident. I hadn't asked him to say that. I don't think I'd even let myself think that far ahead yet, past the immediate fact of Winter's name on that page. But something in the way he said it, deliberate, already turning something over in his own head, told me he'd seen this particular shape before, a young person standing a little too close to someone else's bad decision, and had learned not to assume the story stopped where the paperwork did. Okay, he said, closing the notebook. I'll get people looking into both individuals connected to this. I stood in that quiet shop a long moment after he said it, the grandfather clock still ticking its slow, indifferent rhythm. And I didn't say anything else at all. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because for the first time all night I understood there wasn't anything left that saying would fix. Outside, the patrol car's lights had stopped their slow rotation, someone having switched them off, and the street had gone back to its ordinary darkness, as if nothing in that quiet block of shuttered storefronts had just quietly and permanently changed. Trent called on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 days after that night at Elliot's shop. I was up on a ladder rekeying a lock for a client on the east side. A young couple, first house, the particular nervous excitement of people who'd just signed their names to a mortgage and wanted every door in the place to feel like it was truly theirs, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. And something about the timing, mid-afternoon, midweek, no message, first time, just a call, told me before I even answered that whatever he had to say wasn't going to be small. Got a few minutes, Mr. Schmidt? I climbed down off the ladder, told my client I needed a moment, and walked out to the truck for privacy.
The particular privacy of an empty cab with the windows up, engine off, just me and whatever he was about to tell me. Through the windshield, I could see the couple's front door standing open, new deadbolt gleaming in the afternoon sun, a door that would keep out strangers just fine, and had no way of protecting anybody from the people they already trusted enough to let inside. Go ahead. We've got a name now. The individual who witnessed the transaction and signed alongside your daughter, Keon Roth, 26 years old, lives about 15 minutes from your daughter's apartment. Says he's a freelance trader. Cryptocurrency mostly, from what we've pulled so far. I sat with that a second, turning the name over the way you turn over a word in a language you're only half fluent in. Keon Roth, 26. I thought about the boy in the diner window a year ago, the easy smile, the way Winter had looked at me through that glass like I'd just confirmed something she'd been hoping wasn't true. I hadn't had a name to put to him then. Having one now didn't make him any less of a stranger. It just gave the stranger sharper edges, a shape I could finally hold up against everything else I already suspected about him. What kind of trouble is he in? I asked, because I could hear it in Trent's voice, that particular flatness cops get when they're about to hand you information they've already decided matters. Significant kind. There was an exchange that collapsed about 8 months back. You might have seen it in the news. One of the smaller platforms, not the big collapse everybody talks about, but bad enough for the people who had money on it. Roth had a considerable position tied up there. Public records show a civil judgment against him from a former business partner, unrelated debts still outstanding, and a couple of smaller collections matters besides that. Trent paused, the kind of pause that tells you a man is deciding how much more to say before he's said too much. He's not destitute, from what we can tell. He's got a car, an apartment he's current on. But he's the kind of underwater where a man starts looking for a fast 4 figures wherever he can find them quietly, without anybody official noticing the pattern. Point is, this isn't a guy who happened to be standing nearby when your daughter made a bad decision. This is a guy who was underwater and looking for a way out right around the time a valuable family heirloom came up in conversation with someone who trusted him. I sat in that truck for a long moment, watching a couple of kids ride bikes down the street outside, absolutely unbothered by anything. And I thought about how little Winter probably knew about any of this. The judgment, the collections, the collapsed exchange. I thought about her sitting across from him in that diner, in his apartment, believing she'd found someone who finally understood her, someone who listened better than her own father ever had, while he was doing math in his head about a watch he'd never even had to touch himself to profit from. I thought about the particular cruelty of it, if it turned out to be true, not that he'd wanted money. Plenty of people want money. But that he'd apparently found it easier to extract it through a grieving 24-year-old's guilt than to simply ask her for a loan and risk her saying no the way I had. I thought too about myself at 26 and whether I'd have recognized a man like that if he'd ever crossed my path. I'd like to think so. I'm not entirely sure anymore. Does she know any of this? I asked. About his finances? Can't say for certain yet. That's part of what we're still working out, whether she knew the extent of it or whether he kept that part of himself pretty carefully hidden from her, which wouldn't surprise me, honestly. Men like that tend to be selective about what they let people see. He let that hang a moment. I've been doing this a long time, Mr. Schmidt, long enough to know that sometimes the person who looks most responsible for something turns out to be running the con, and sometimes they're just standing closest to somebody else's.
Which one is he?
Too early to say for certain, but I'll tell you what my gut says for whatever that's worth to you right now. Another pause, shorter this time, like he'd already decided the next thing he was going to say before I'd finished asking the last question. There's one more thing you should know, Mr. Schmidt, and I want to warn you up front it's not going to sit easy. I'd rather show you than tell you over the phone, Trent said. You got 20 minutes to swing by the station. I did. I told my client I'd finish the recce in the morning, apologized twice for something that wasn't really my fault, and drove across town with my hands tight on the wheel the whole way, bracing for something I couldn't yet name. Whatever calm I'd managed to hold on to since that night at Elliot's shop had mostly worn through by the time I found parking.
replaced by the particular restlessness of a man who's been told something is coming and has nothing to do with the waiting, except imagine every possible shape it might take. Trent met me in a small side office, not an interrogation room, just a desk with too many folders on it and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. He had a thin file open in front of him when I sat down, and he turned it around to face me, the way Elliot had turned that affidavit around 3 days earlier. Like he'd learned it was easier for people to hear hard things while looking at paper instead of a face. 2 years ago, he said. Different county, about 40 minutes from here. A young woman named Dana Fitch filed a police report against her then-boyfriend, Keon Roth. I looked at the report, a name I didn't know, a date I'd have had no reason to remember, a paragraph of dense procedural language that took me a second read to actually understand. Dana Fitch, 23 at the time, had reported that a ring belonging to her late grandmother, an engagement ring, gold, small diamond, insured for a few $1,000s, had gone missing from her apartment. She'd initially suspected a break-in. It came out later during the investigation that she herself had pawned it at Roth's suggestion to help cover a shortfall he claimed was temporary. She'd told the investigating officer, according to the notes, that he'd convinced her the ring wasn't really doing anything, just sitting in a drawer, and that her grandmother would rather she use it than let it collect dust. I read that sentence twice. Wasn't really doing anything, just sitting in a drawer. I thought of Winter in that apartment I'd never seen, saying some version of nearly the same thing about a watch sitting in my safe. And I felt something cold move down through my chest that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the particular horror of recognizing a script, of realizing that the words I'd taken 4 days ago as evidence of my own daughter's private betrayal weren't private at all. They'd been handed to her, rehearsed, tested successfully on somebody else first. She never pressed charges, Trent said. Case went nowhere. No affidavit involved that time, nothing on paper connecting him directly to the sale, and she ultimately declined to pursue it, which happens more than people think. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's exactly the same thing your daughter's probably feeling right now, some tangled up loyalty that doesn't make a lot of sense from the outside, but feels unbreakable from the inside. So this isn't the first time. Based on what I'm looking at, no. And I'd guess, though I can't prove this part yet, that it isn't the second time either. Men like this don't usually stop at 2. I sat with the file in my hands for a long moment, not reading anymore, just holding it, feeling the particular weight of understanding something that changes the whole shape of what you thought you knew, without changing a single fact about what actually happened. Winter hadn't acted alone. She hadn't even acted first, not really. She'd walked into a pattern someone else had already built and tested, a door someone else had already learned exactly how to open. And underneath that thought, quieter, unwelcome, came another one. I didn't say out loud to Trent or to anyone how easily I recognized this, how clearly I could see laid out on a page in front of me the exact mechanics of a man who convinces someone that taking something isn't really taking it, and how much harder it had always been to see anything resembling that shape in myself. In the phone I'd followed, under a fake name, in the diner windows I'd found reasons to drive past, in 4 years of telling myself that watching over someone and controlling them were 2 entirely different things. Dana Fitch's report described a man who'd made her believe his version of events was the only reasonable one. I'd spent 4 years quietly deciding my version of watching over Winter was the only reasonable kind of love a father who'd already lost too much could offer. I didn't let myself finish that thought all the way. Not there, not in that office, not with Trent watching my face for whatever it was about to do. It doesn't change what she did, I said finally, more to myself than to him. No, Trent agreed. It doesn't. But it might explain a piece of why. Neither of us said anything else for a while after that. Trent closed the file gently, the way you close something you've had to hand someone that you wish you hadn't needed to. Outside his window, someone in the parking lot was struggling to get a stroller folded down into the trunk of a car, wrestling with it in the heat, and I watched that small, ordinary failure for longer than it deserved, grateful for something simple to look at that had nothing to do with either of the 2 names sitting on the desk between us. I didn't go straight home from the station.
I drove around for a while first, no particular route. Just the kind of driving a man does when he isn't ready yet to sit still with what he's learned. By the time I finally pulled into my own driveway, it was well past dark, and the house sat there the way it always does at that hour, porch light on a timer, every window black except the one over the kitchen sink, where I leave a small lamp burning, out of habit more than need. I sat in the truck in the driveway for a long time before I went in. I had my phone in my hand almost the whole time, thumb hovering over Winter's name, composing sentences I never sent. Something like, "I know about him. I know what he did to someone else. Please be careful." Something like, "Whatever's about to happen isn't just about the watch anymore, and I need you to understand that before it's too late to protect yourself from the parts of this you didn't choose." I must have started that message 4 or 5 different ways, deleting each one before I got past the second sentence, because every version of it ran into the same wall. I couldn't warn her about Keon without also warning her about Trent, about the investigation, about the thing I'd already set in motion 3 days ago that couldn't be quietly unwound just because I'd since learned a detail that complicated how I felt about it. At one point, I actually typed out a full paragraph and let my thumb hover over send for what felt like a full minute, engine ticking as it cooled some moth or other insect, throwing itself repeatedly against the porch light before it clicked off. I read the message back to myself 3 times. It sounded on the third read less like a warning and more like a confession, like I was trying to hand her a reason to be angrier at Trent than at herself, or angrier at Keon than at the choice she'd still made with her own hand. I deleted it. I sat with that a long time. The porch light clicked off eventually, its timer running out, leaving me in the dark with just the dashboard glow and my own reflection, faint in the windshield, older than I generally let myself notice. Here's the thing I finally understood sitting there. If I called her now, I wouldn't be protecting her from Keon. I'd be protecting her from consequences one more time, the way I'd been doing it for 4 straight years, except this time I'd be dressing it up as concern for her safety, instead of just admitting what it actually was. The same old instinct to step between my daughter and anything hard, even when the hard thing was already moving under its own power and no longer had anything to do with me at all. Trent was going to investigate Keon, whether I called her tonight or not. The affidavit was already in a file somewhere with her signature on it, whether she was braced for what came next or not. All a warning call would really do is let her get ahead of it, rehearse an explanation, coordinate a story, maybe even reach out to Keon before Trent got the chance to. I didn't think she'd do that on purpose. I don't think she's built that way, not really. But I also knew sitting in that dark truck that I'd spent 4 years underestimating exactly how far grief and love and bad advice could push a person who felt like she had nothing left to lose. I'd underestimated it once already in a closet with an empty safe. I wasn't eager to find out what else I'd been wrong about. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and went inside. I didn't sleep much. I made tea I didn't drink, sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, and at some point past midnight, without entirely deciding to, I found myself standing upstairs in the hallway, outside what used to be Winter's room. Still is her room, technically, full of things she'd never bothered to fully move out over the years. Posters from high school still tacked to the wall, a shelf of trophies from a swim team she'd quit at 14. I stood there a long time, with my hand on the doorknob. I don't know what I was looking for. Some proof maybe that the daughter who used to fall asleep with a book open on her chest was still in there somewhere, unchanged, recoverable, if I could just find the right door to walk through and remind her of it. The hallway was cold in the particular way old houses get cold at night, and somewhere below me, the furnace kicked on with its familiar low groan, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times and never once really listened to before. But I didn't turn the knob. I stood there in the dark hallway with my palm flat against cool brass, feeling the particular weight of a decision I'd already made hours ago in that driveway. And after a while, I took my hand off the door and walked back to my own room without opening it. 6 days left until the graduation. I lay in bed a long time that night, listening to a house that had gotten very good over 4 years at being quiet in exactly this particular way. The 6 days between that night in my dark truck and the graduation passed the way I imagine a held breath passes for someone who's decided not to let it out yet. Technically time moving forward, nothing about it feeling like actual progress. Trent called twice more, brief updates, mostly procedural. The investigation was moving. Keon had been contacted for questioning, and according to Trent, had lawyered up almost immediately, which he told me wasn't necessarily suspicious on its own, but wasn't exactly nothing either. There was a court date being set somewhere in the machinery of the system, weeks out, still an abstraction I couldn't yet make feel real, no matter how many times Trent said the words out loud to me. I'd hang up each time and stand in whatever room I was standing in, my kitchen, the cab of my truck, once the aisle of a hardware store buying a part I don't remember needing, and feel the particular vertigo of a man watching a decision he'd already made keep unfolding in rooms he wasn't in and couldn't see into. I went to work each of those mornings like nothing had changed, because nothing about my client's locks had changed. And there's a strange mercy in that, in a job that doesn't care what's happening in the rest of your life, that just wants a deadbolt seated correctly and a keypad programmed right. I rekeyed the young couple's house, finished the job I'd walked off of the day Trent first called. I fixed a jam safe for a dentist's office downtown, installed a new camera system for a jeweler 2 towns over who'd had a break-in scare. The kind of steady, solvable work that let my hands stay busy while the rest of me sat somewhere else entirely. I drove home each evening to a quiet house and made dinners I mostly didn't finish, and some nights I found myself standing in the closet doorway upstairs, looking at that safe, though I never opened it again that week. There was nothing left inside worth checking on. Winter, as far as I could tell from the outside, had no idea any of this was happening. She texted me twice that week, both times in the easy, unguarded way she used to text me before any of this started, before Sunday dinner had gone the way it had. The first was just a photo her cap and gown laid out on her bed, tissue paper still creased into the fabric, tassel still in its little plastic sleeve, captioned only with a string of excited emojis I didn't fully understand, but recognized as happiness anyway. I stared at that photo longer than it probably deserved, at the ordinary clutter around the edges of the frame. A water bottle, a phone charger, a stack of textbooks she wouldn't need much longer. Proof of an entire life she was living that had nothing to do with any of what I now knew was coming for her. The second came the night before graduation, later than I expected, closer to 11. Can't believe it's actually happening tomorrow. Thank you for still coming, after everything. It means more than you know. Love you, Dad. I read that message maybe a dozen times sitting at my kitchen table, with the phone screen lighting up my hands in the dark. After everything. I turned that phrase over more than any of the others, wondering exactly how much she thought everything covered the argument over dinner, probably the tension of the last 2 weeks, whatever version of our strain she'd let herself acknowledge. She had no idea it covered a detective's office, a case file with another woman's name in it, a graduation ceremony I already knew, with a certainty that sat in my stomach like a stone, was going to end with an empty box in my hands in front of 300 strangers. Love you, Dad. 3 words she'd typed out easily, automatically, the way you sign off a message without thinking too hard about whether you mean it in the moment or just mean it as a habit worth keeping. I believed she meant it. That was almost the hardest part, knowing she meant it and knowing tomorrow was going to test exactly how much that meaning could survive. I typed out 3 or 4 replies. Can't wait to see you walk. So proud of you, sweetheart. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. All of them true, technically, in the narrowest sense a sentence can be true while leaving out everything that actually matters. I deleted each one before sending it, the same way I deleted that warning 6 nights earlier for reasons that felt related, even though I couldn't have explained exactly how. Maybe it was that any reply I sent now would be a kind of lie by omission, a small, dishonest comfort handed to her on the last ordinary night she was going to have for a while. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I just didn't trust my own hands not to type something true. I set the phone face down on the table and sat there a long time in the dark kitchen, her message still glowing faintly through the case, unanswered. while somewhere across town, my daughter fell asleep, believing tomorrow was going to be the good kind of ending. I didn't sleep either, not for a long while. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum, thinking about all the ordinary tomorrows I'd promised myself over the years, without ever once imagining I'd be the one standing at the center of ruining this particular one. People asked me afterward, Trent, mostly in one of our later conversations, why I went through with it at all. Why I didn't just call the school, explain there'd been a family situation, quietly, skip the whole ceremony, and let Winter walk across that stage without me sitting anywhere in that auditorium at all. It would have spared us both the scene. I've turned that question over more times than I can count, and the truest answer I've got is this. Some part of me needed her to see my face when she understood what I already knew. Not to hurt her. I want that understood clearly even now. I needed her to see that I hadn't disappeared on her the way it might have looked if I'd simply stayed home. I needed her to know I was still there, still showing up, even for the part of this I already knew was going to break something in both of us. There was another reason too, one I didn't fully admit to myself until much later. If I skipped the ceremony, I could keep pretending for a little while longer that there was still some version of that afternoon where things went the way they were supposed to. Showing up meant closing that door for good. I think I needed to close it myself in front of her, rather than let it just quietly swing shut on its own sometime later, when neither of us was paying attention. So I put on the good shirt I'd picked up from the dry cleaner 9 days earlier, back when I still believed I was going to hand my daughter her mother's watch and watch her face do something worth remembering for the right reasons. I drove to the auditorium alone. I found my seat, and when the moment came when the MC called my name and the little velvet box sat waiting in my jacket pocket, empty, except for the shape memory of what used to fill it, I walked up onto that stage the way I'd walked into 100 difficult rooms over 31 years of this trade steady, because steady was the only thing left I knew how to be. You already know what happened next. The empty box, the silence I let stretch too long. Wrong box, I'll find the right one, said to a crowd that laughed, relieved, not understanding yet that nothing about that moment was a mistake at all. Winter's smile not moving, but something behind her eyes going very still, the particular stillness of someone confirming a suspicion they'd been hoping right up until that second was wrong. I stepped off that stage and didn't look back, and I sat through the rest of the names being called without hearing a single one of them, the weight of that empty box sitting on my knee like something with actual mass. The ceremony ended a little after 4. I remember the exact way the light had shifted while I sat there, afternoon sun slanting lower through the tall windows along the east wall, throwing long gold rectangles across rows of empty folding chairs, as families started filtering out in loud, happy clusters, hugging, taking photographs, calling out names across the room, utterly unaware that 20 feet from them, a much quieter kind of ending had already started. I stood when most everyone else did, moving slower than the crowd around me, letting people pass on either side the way you let a current pass around a rock. I made it almost to the exit doors before I heard my name. Not called out loud exactly, said close behind me, breathless, like she'd been running. "Dad?" I turned around. Winter had pushed through a cluster of her classmates to reach me, cap still on, gown still zipped, mascara already starting to run at the corners, though the ceremony hadn't given her a single obvious reason yet to cry. Nothing except whatever she'd seen in my face up on that stage. Whatever she'd understood in the 3 seconds our eyes had held before I closed that box. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Armani and Elena hanging back near the doors, watching us with the particular caution of people who sense they've walked into the middle of something they weren't invited to.
"Dad, what happened up there? Where's the—"
She stopped herself before she finished the sentence, and I watched something shift across her face in real time, the last thin membrane of her not quite knowing finally giving way to something closer to actual understanding. Whatever she'd told herself over the past 9 days about my strange silences, my unanswered texts, The tension she'd chalked up to nothing more than the leftover residue of one bad Sunday dinner, all of it seemed to collapse at once, right there in the crowded aisle. 300 strangers filing past us on either side, utterly unaware that anything more than a proud father's harmless mix-up had just happened 20 feet away. "Can we talk outside?" I said, not a question. I didn't have it in me to make it sound like one. She followed me out through the double doors into the parking lot, gown gathered awkwardly in one fist so she wouldn't trip on the hem cap slightly askew now from pushing through the crowd. And behind us, I could hear Armani calling her name once uncertain before deciding not to follow. The afternoon heat hit us both the moment the door swung shut. Ordinary and indifferent cars glinting in long rows all the way to the tree line, and somewhere behind us, muffled through glass and distance, I could still hear the tail end of the ceremony's applause fading into the general noise of several hundred families discovering all at once that the hardest part of the day was already over for them. For us, it hadn't even started yet. "Dad, please." Her voice cracked on the second word, all the practiced composure from inside the auditorium gone now that it was just the two of us, standing between rows of parked cars, the last of the crowd thinning out behind us toward the main doors. "Please, just talk to me. Tell me what's going on." "I think you already know, Winter." She flinched like I'd hit her, though I hadn't raised my voice at all. Hadn't done anything except say the thing we both already understood to be true. "I don't, okay? Maybe I have an idea. But you don't understand what happened. It wasn't like that. It wasn't just me deciding to—" She stopped, started again. "It's complicated, Dad. There were reasons, things you don't know about." "Keon," I said. Just the name, flat, no question mark on it, and I watched it land on her the way a word only lands when it confirms something someone was desperately hoping you didn't know yet. Her face went through several things at once. Shock, then something like fear, then underneath both a kind of exhausted relief. The particular relief of someone who's been carrying a secret so long that even having it discovered feels lighter than carrying it one more day. "How do you—" "There's a detective involved now. Has been for a week. I found the watch at a shop downtown. I saw your signature on a piece of paper claiming it was a gift from your grandmother." I kept my voice level the way I'd kept it level with Elliot with Trent, the way 31 years of difficult conversations had taught me to keep it level, even when everything underneath it wasn't level at all. "That's a felony, Winter, not a family disagreement. A felony with your name and your signature on the paperwork." "You did this! You went to the police! On me!" Her voice climbed disbelief, curdling fast into something sharper. "Dad, I'm your daughter. You can make this go away. You know people. You fix things. You've been fixing things my whole life, so fix this. Please. I can't have a record. I already have a job offer that's contingent on—" "I'm not fixing this one." "Why not?" She was crying now, the mascara she'd probably touched up before the ceremony running in earnest, and some old reflex in me 4 years deep strained hard against everything I'd decided in that dark truck 6 nights earlier. "You've fixed everything else. The truck accident, the apartment deposit. You've never once made me actually deal with anything, so why is this the one time you decide to be a hard ass about it?" I stood there a moment before I answered because she wasn't entirely wrong, and some part of me needed a second to hold that truth before I could say what came next. "Because I finally understood what all that fixing actually cost you," I said. 24 years, Winter. 24 years I've caught every single thing you dropped, and I told myself that was love. I need you to trust the law now, the same way you've spent your whole life trusting me to make the hard part disappear. I can't be the one who makes it disappear this time. I don't think I'm allowed to be, not anymore. That's insane. You're choosing some stranger with a badge over your own kid. I'm not choosing him over you. I'm choosing to stop being the reason nothing you do ever actually costs you anything. You're controlling, you know that? She said, and there it was again, the same word from that Sunday dinner 2 weeks earlier. Except this time, it didn't come out sharp and accusing, it came out exhausted, almost pleading. like she was hoping the word itself still had enough power left to make me change course the way it might have a month ago. You've always had to control everything, every part of my life, and now you're controlling this too? Deciding what happens to me?
Deciding I have to learn some lesson like you get to be the one who decides when I've suffered enough.
Maybe I have controlled too much, I said, and meant it more than she probably expected me to. But this isn't that. This is the first time in 4 years I've let something happen instead of stopping it.
She stared at me like I'd started speaking a language she didn't recognize, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. The parking lot around us slowly emptying, other families' laughter and car doors and congratulations drifting past us like weather neither of us was standing inside of anymore. "You're supposed to protect me," she said finally, quieter now, more broken than angry. "I am protecting you," I said. "You just don't want the kind I'm offering."
I didn't know saying it whether that was true or whether it was just the kind of thing a man tells himself so he can keep walking toward his truck without turning around.
I still don't fully know if I'm honest with you now. I only knew I couldn't take it back once I'd said it, the same way I hadn't been able to take back anything else I'd set in motion over the last 6 days. I got in my truck. I didn't look at her through the windshield the way I usually would have, out of some old habit of making sure she got safely to her own car. I just started the engine and pulled out of that lot and in the rear view mirror. For one long second before I turned onto the road, I watched my daughter standing alone between 2 parked cars in her cap and gown. Mascara streaked halfway down her face, not moving. Not calling after me, just standing there, in the only kind of silence I'd ever actually managed to teach her. The preliminary hearing was set for the following Thursday, in a courtroom smaller and plainer than anything television had ever prepared me for. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet the color of weak coffee, a judge who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on a morning that hot. Winter sat at a table up front with a public defender young enough that I found myself absurdly worrying whether he had enough experience for this, some old paternal reflex firing even now, even here, aimed at completely the wrong target. She was wearing a gray dress I didn't recognize, her hair pulled back plainer than I'd seen it in years, dressed the way you dress when someone's told you to look like a person the court should take seriously and you're not entirely sure you still qualify. I sat in the gallery 3 rows back, close enough to see the back of her neck, the particular stiffness in her shoulders that told me she knew exactly where I was without turning around to check. Her attorney had been talking to the prosecutor for days by that point, according to Trent, who'd walked me through most of it over the phone the night before, so the hearing itself wouldn't blindside me. Winter's cooperation counted for something. She'd given a full statement about Kian's involvement almost immediately once the investigation reached her. Laid out the diner conversation, the apartment, the phrase, "you don't owe him anything," all of it corroborating what Dana Fitch had described 2 years earlier in a different county. First offense, no prior record, a grieving young woman who'd been, by every account she gave and every account the prosecutor seemed willing to credit, guided toward the decision more than she'd arrived at it alone. The deal that came together reduced the felony to a lesser charge, theft, not fraud. The affidavit issue absorbed into a broader admission of guilt rather than prosecuted as its own separate crime. Probation. Restitution to Elliot for what he'd need to return to a rightful owner, minus what he'd already recovered, reselling nothing, since the watch itself had never left evidence. Community service. No jail time assuming she completed the terms without incident. I watched her shoulders drop half an inch when her attorney read the terms aloud, the particular release of a person who'd spent 2 weeks braced for something much worse, landing instead on something merely very bad. I felt something complicated watching that relief move through her. Not quite satisfaction. I want to be honest about that because there wasn't much in that courtroom that felt like satisfaction to me at all. Something closer to a held breath finally allowed to go, mixed with a grief I hadn't expected. Watching my daughter stand in a courtroom accepting a criminal record at 24 years old because of a choice that had started at my own dinner table with a door I'd left a crack open by saying no to a trip that never should have mattered this much to begin with. I thought about the phrase Trent had used weeks earlier about a door left open a crack, rather than a decision anyone had fully made, and I thought about how many doors in this whole business had been left open by just enough people for things to slide through that none of us on our own would have chosen to let happen. She glanced back at me exactly once as the bailiff led her toward a side door for processing, and whatever was in that look, not gratitude, not quite forgiveness, something more provisional than either, I held on to it longer than I probably should have, turning it over the rest of that day like a coin I couldn't decide the value of. Kian's hearing was scheduled separately, later that same morning, and I stayed to watch it, mostly out of a need to see for myself what the man attached to all of this actually looked like in daylight, under fluorescent light, without a diner window or an apartment door between us. He wasn't there. His attorney was a different one, older, sharper dressed than the public defender at Winter's table. The kind of suit that costs more than most people's monthly rent standing alone. At the defense table, while the judge asked with visible irritation whether his client intended to actually appear for his own preliminary hearing, the attorney offered something vague about a scheduling conflict, a family matter. Language careful enough that it told you nothing while sounding like it was telling you something. The judge didn't look satisfied. She said something crisp about bench warrants and second chances that don't extend indefinitely and set a new date, her tone making clear this particular courtesy wasn't going to repeat itself. Neither, from what I could see of Trent's face 2 rows over, did he look satisfied either. "He'll be looking at more than your daughter," Trent murmured to me afterward, out in the hallway, voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. Prior pattern? Uncooperative, and now a no-show at a hearing he was legally required to attend? Judges don't love that. Prosecutors like it even less. Whatever deal was on the table for him, if there ever was one, just got a lot less generous. "Where is he?" Trent's jaw tightened slightly, the particular tell of a man choosing his next words with more care than usual. "That," he said, "is exactly what we're trying to find out." Trent called again 8 days after that courthouse hallway conversation, and this time there wasn't much preamble before he got to it. I'd just finished a job across town and was still sitting in the truck with the engine running and the AC fighting a losing battle against the afternoon heat when the phone buzzed against the cup holder. "He's gone, Mr. Schmidt. Roth. Left the States sometime in the last week and a half. Car's gone from his apartment. Landlord says he cleared out most of his things in a hurry, no forwarding address on file. His attorney says he can't reach him either, which either means Roth's cut him loose too, or he's telling the truth and genuinely doesn't know where his own client is. Judge issued a bench warrant the morning of the missed hearing. As of this afternoon, he's officially a fugitive." I sat with that for a moment, the truck's AC still rattling against the heat, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite anger either. Something closer to a grim, unsurprised recognition, the particular feeling of watching a pattern complete itself, exactly the way you'd have predicted if anyone had asked you to guess in advance. Where would he even go? Could be anywhere. People like this usually have a second city lined up before they need it. An old friend's couch family, somewhere that doesn't ask too many questions, sometimes just enough cash saved to disappear for a few months, and hope everyone's stopped looking by the time it runs out. We'll keep the warrant active. Sometimes these things resolve themselves, eventually. A traffic stop somewhere, 3 states over, somebody recognizes a name on a routine check. Sometimes they don't resolve for years. I won't lie to you about that. I've got cases from a decade back still sitting open on somebody's desk waiting on exactly that kind of luck. And Winter's case, does this change anything for her? Not really, not now. Her deal's already finalized, terms are set, be a matter of her completing them at this point. A pause, the kind Trent seemed to favor before saying something he suspected would land harder than the words themselves. For what it's worth, Mr. Schmidt and I say this having watched a lot of these situations play out over the years. A guy running the moment things get hard tells you something, tells you a lot, actually. Sometimes more than a courtroom ever would have. I understood what he meant, and some ungenerous part of me wanted to feel vindicated by it, wanted to call Winter immediately and say, "See, I told you this is exactly who he was." though I hadn't actually told her anything of the sort, not directly, not in words, either of us could point back to later. What I felt instead, driving home with the truck's AC finally catching up to the afternoon heat, was something closer to grief, on her behalf. Whatever she'd believed about him, however much of it had been real to her, however much comfort she'd taken from someone who'd finally seemed to understand what 4 years of grief had done to her, all of it had just proven itself capable of vanishing the moment it cost him anything at all. She'd trusted someone enough to break the law for him, and he'd left her standing in the wreckage, alone, the second his own name showed up on a warrant. I thought about calling her once I got home. Kitchen still warm from the afternoon sun through the west window. I got as far as opening her contact on my phone, thumb hovering, the way it had hovered over that unsent warning 2 weeks earlier, before I set the phone down on the counter instead. I wasn't sure yet what I'd even say, and some new instinct, still unfamiliar to me, told me this particular piece of news might land better coming from someone other than the father she was currently working very hard not to speak to. She called me herself later that evening, as it turned out, though. I didn't know that until I noticed the missed call an hour after it happened. I'd been out back trying badly to fix a sprinkler head that had been broken since spring, hands too greasy to answer phone, forgotten on the kitchen windowsill where I'd left it. By the time I came back inside and saw her name on the screen, 1 missed call, no voicemail, and tried calling back, the line just rang and rang before dropping into her outgoing message, cheerful and unchanged, recorded, probably sometime back in college, a version of her voice from before any of this, that made something in my chest ache in a way I hadn't fully expected. "Hi, you've reached Winter. I can't get to my phone right now, but leave a message and I'll call you back." A girl who sounded like she still believed every problem in her life was the kind you could solve by simply calling someone back. I tried twice more that night. Both times, the same thing ringing, then nothing, then a voice from years ago telling me she couldn't come to the phone right now. I sat at the kitchen table afterward with the phone in front of me, screen gone dark, and wondered what she'd wanted to tell me badly enough to call rather than text, and whether whatever it was would still be waiting for me in the morning, or whether some window I hadn't even known was open had just quietly closed while my hands were busy with something as small and ordinary as a broken sprinkler head. 3 weeks passed before she came to the house. I'd rekeyed every lock myself the week before, working slow and methodical, the way I do most jobs that matter. Standing in my own driveway on a Saturday afternoon, swapping cylinders I'd installed with my own hands years ago for new ones, thinking the whole time about the particular strangeness of using 31 years of expertise to lock out the one person that expertise had always, in some sense, existed to protect. I told myself it was practical, standard precaution, given everything that had happened, given that she'd once known every code and combination in this house better than I did myself. I'm not sure I believed that reasoning, even while I was giving it to myself. She still had a key that no longer worked. I watched her try it from the kitchen window before she ever knocked. Watched her slide it into the deadbolt, twist, meet resistance, try again. The way you try something twice before you'll let yourself accept it's actually true. She stood there a moment afterward, hands still on the door, shoulders dropping in a way that told me she understood exactly what the failed key meant before I ever opened the door to confirm it. I had a suitcase already packed and waiting by the front door. Hers, the same one she'd taken to college in it years ago. The same one she'd have packed for a trip to Cancun if things had gone differently. I'd gone into her room 3 days earlier and done it myself, folding clothes I hadn't touched in years, packing carefully, the way you pack something you intend to hand over, with some dignity intact, rather than just dump on a porch. It had taken me most of an evening, sitting on the edge of her old bed between trips to the closet, surrounded by a version of her life frozen somewhere around age 19. Concert ticket stubs pinned to a corkboard, a stuffed rabbit missing one eye that I'd bought her the year Rosemary was first diagnosed, back when I still believed a soft toy could fix something a doctor couldn't. I'd found things in there I wasn't prepared for. A photo of the 3 of us at a lake house we'd rented the summer before Rosemary got sick, tucked into a drawer, like she hadn't been able to decide whether keeping it made things better or worse. I'd packed that too, wrapped carefully in a sweater so it wouldn't crease. And I'd sat with it in my hands longer than I meant to before I could make myself put it away. When I finally opened the door, she was still standing there with the useless key in her hand.
You changed the locks.
I did. Dad, this is my house. I grew up here. It was your house, I said. It's mine now, the way it's always technically been mine, and I've decided who gets a key to it going forward. She looked past me into the front hall at the suitcase sitting there by the door like a decision already made without her, and something in her face crumpled in a way I hadn't seen since the day we buried her mother. You're seriously doing this? After everything, you're just throwing me out? I have nowhere to go, Dad. I have nothing. I picked up the suitcase and set it down on the porch in front of her feet, the same slow, deliberate motion I use setting down a finished job I'm satisfied with, though satisfaction wasn't remotely what I felt doing it. You have exactly what you wanted, I said. Freedom. No father telling you what to do, checking on you, showing up places he shouldn't. No rules, no expectations weighing you down. Isn't that what you called me, Winter, controlling toxic well? Nobody's controlling you now. That's not fair. Isn't it you sold your mother's watch for a boy who ran the second things got hard? You told me it was complicated, that there were reasons that I didn't understand. Well, this is complicated too. This is a house, and I've decided you're going to go build a life somewhere that isn't inside the one I've been holding together for you for 4 years, while you decided I was the villain in it. She stood on that porch for a long moment, mouth open, like she was waiting for me to take it back the way I always had. Every ultimatum I'd ever drawn softening the moment she cried hard enough, every hard line I'd ever set dissolving before it had the chance to actually mean anything. I understood, watching her wait for that, exactly how many times I'd trained her to expect it.
I didn't take it back.
I love you, I said, and it came out steadier than I expected. Steadier than anything else I'd said in the last 3 weeks. I need you to hear that clearly, because everything else I'm about to do is going to look like the opposite of it, and it isn't. But I can't keep being the reason nothing in your life has ever actually cost you anything. That's not love, Winter. Your mother told me that once, a long time before any of this, and I didn't understand what she meant until about a month ago. Love without limits isn't love. It's just a different kind of trap dressed up in a nicer word. She didn't answer that. Maybe there wasn't an answer that would have fit the moment. She picked up the suitcase, arms straining slightly against its weight, and stood there another second, like she was waiting for the porch itself to change its mind on her behalf. It didn't. Neither did I. She turned and walked down the front steps down the driveway toward a car I didn't recognize idling at the curb. Alina's, I'd learn later, the last of her friends still willing to show up for her. I watched her go as far as the bottom step before I made myself stop watching, because I understood if I kept watching, I'd find some reason to call her back, some crack in my own resolve wide enough for 4 more years of the same pattern to come pouring back through. I stepped back inside. I closed the door. I turned the new deadbolt, the one only I had a key to now, and I stood there in my own front hall for a long time afterward, listening to a car door close outside, an engine start, tires pulling slowly away down a street that had gone very quiet. I didn't watch her drive off. I didn't need to. I'd spent 4 years watching her walk all over the version of myself I used to be, and I'd finally, at some real cost to both of us, earned the right not to watch this particular part. The house was quieter that night than I'd ever heard it, which is saying something because it had been getting quieter by degrees for 4 straight years, and I hadn't thought there was much room left for it to go. I made myself dinner. Actually made it this time, not just reheated something, standing at the counter. Grilled a couple of sausages out on the back porch the way Rosemary used to do every 4th of July. The smell of it drifting out over a yard that hadn't heard anyone but me in it for longer than I wanted to count. I ate slow, sitting outside until the light went from gold to gray to the particular deep blue that settles in just before full dark, listening to a sprinkler running somewhere, 2 yards over kids' bikes ticking past on the sidewalk, the whole ordinary machinery of other people's evenings carrying on around the edges of mine. Then I did what I do every night. I walked the house.
Front door chain, living room windows, the kitchen door out to the garage, the basement door at the bottom of the stairs. Every latch exactly where it should be, checked with the same hands that had checked them 10,000 times before. Except tonight, the ritual felt different in a way I couldn't immediately name. Lighter, maybe? Or hollower? The particular strangeness of performing a habit built around protecting a family that had quietly become just one person, standing alone in a hallway. I thought walking it about all the nights Rosemary used to walk it with me in the early years, carrying a sleeping Winter up to bed. By the time I finished the circuit, both of them tucked away safe before I'd even reached the top of the stairs. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I'm not sure why it came back to me tonight of all nights, except that grief seems to work that way sometimes, waiting patiently for the quietest possible moment before it decides to visit. I went upstairs last, same as always. Not to the closet this time. There was nothing left in that safe worth checking on, and Elliot still had the watch itself tied up until the restitution paperwork finished clearing. One more small ongoing cost of everything I'd set in motion 5 weeks earlier. I stood in the bedroom doorway a moment instead, looking at the room the way you look at a place you've lived in so long you've mostly stopped seeing it. And then I crossed to the nightstand on what had always been Rosemary's side of the bed, though I'd never once moved anything of hers off it in 4 years. In the drawer, under a stack of old birthday cards I couldn't bring myself to throw away, was a small silver frame, our wedding photo. The two of us, young and unbearably certain of everything, standing in her parents' backyard in Aurora, my tie crooked, her laughing at something just out of frame that I've never been able to remember. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it in both hands, the way she used to hold that velvet box, tracing the edge of the frame with my thumb, the same absent way she used to trace the engraving on Otto's watch. I thought about a storm drain on Elm Street, a hair clip, a 4-year-old crying for 3 days over something small enough to fit in your palm, and a father who'd stayed up past midnight with her, staring down that grate like the two of them could will it back into the light through sheer stubbornness. I'd have done anything for her back then. I'd have done anything for her 3 weeks ago too, if I'm honest. Which is exactly why I'd had to leave that suitcase on the porch instead, because doing anything for her had stopped somewhere in the last 4 years, meaning the same thing as doing right by her. I thought about Winter standing in a dorm hallway at 10 minutes of hesitation stretching into 6 hours she'd spent every day since trying not to look at directly. I understood something now that I hadn't fully let myself understand before tonight, that she'd built her whole avoidance around that phone call the same careful way I'd built mine around control. Both of us constructing elaborate architecture to keep from standing still in the one room neither of us could bear. I never told her I didn't blame her for those 6 hours. I'm not sure I ever will, not out loud, not in words she could hold on to, the way she held on to other things I'd said over the years. Some doors once shut take a very particular kind of courage to open again. And I don't know yet if either of us has found it. I'd spent 31 years believing that if I installed the right locks, checked them enough times, kept every door in this house sealed tight against whatever might come for the people inside it, I could keep my family safe simply by refusing to let anything reach them. I understand now that safety was never something you could bolt into a door frame. It was something you had to be willing to let go of, had to be willing to watch someone you love walk straight into the consequence you could have shielded them from, because shielding them every time for 4 straight years hadn't kept anyone safe at all. It had just kept us both from ever finding out what either of us was actually made of. Otto used to say a good watch and a good lock did the same job, told you exactly what you could trust and exactly when. I think now he was only half right. The other half of that job, the part he never got around to teaching anyone, was knowing when to stop checking and simply trust the thing to hold on its own. I closed the frame's little clasp, set it back in the drawer exactly where I'd found it, and sat there a long while in the dark, not moving, not needing to. The house held still around me the way it always did now, and for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, that stillness didn't feel like something waiting to be filled. It just felt like quiet. Mine to keep.
The deadbolt on the front door catches the porch light for just a second before the timer clicks it off a small brass tongue seated clean in its frame, holding nothing back and letting nothing in, doing exactly the one job it was built to do. Upstairs, a drawer sits closed. A hook by the door holds a single set of keys. The house settles the way old houses do at night, and nobody is there to hear it but the man who built every lock inside it with his own 2 hands. I used to believe that love meant never letting the people you cherish feel the full weight of their own choices, that if I just held on tightly enough, checked every door enough times, nothing could ever slip away from me again the way Rosemary had. I understand now that this was never protection, it was fear wearing protection's clothes. Real love, it turns out, sometimes means standing still with your hands open while someone you'd give anything for walks straight into the consequence you could have shielded them from, trusting that they're strong enough to survive what you're no longer willing to prevent. I think about the man I was before that empty safe, and the man writing this down now, and God knows those 2 men would hardly recognize each other. God knows I've asked myself more nights than I can count whether I did right by her. And God willing, one day she'll understand it wasn't punishment I was after. It was the truth. The same truth my own wife tried to hand me years before I was ready to hear it. If you were standing where I stood, watching your own child walk toward a consequence you had the power to erase, would you have let it happen? I still don't know if I'd make the same choice twice. Tell me in the comments where you'd have landed. And if this story found something true in you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay a while longer. There are more stories like this one waiting.